Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine Podcast Radio. You're about to listen to an episode of Tech Done Different podcast with Ted Harrington. Do you follow the pack or challenge the status quo? Join Ted as he explores how to succeed by going against conventional wisdom. You'll hear leaders in technology and security tell stories about how they achieve their success by doing things differently. Knowledge is power. Now, more than ever.
Blue Lava is the first business platform for CISOs to manage their security program. Blue Lava guides security leaders to effectively measure, optimize, and communicate their security program with confidence and ease in one platform. Learn more at bluelava.net.
Devo unlocks the full value of machine data for the world's most instrumented enterprises. The Devo Data Analytics Platform addresses the explosion in volume of machine data and the crushing demands of algorithms and automation. Learn more at devo.com.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Tech Done Different. As always, I'm your host, Ted Harrington. And with me here today is a very special guest, a dear friend of mine, a fellow author, and truly someone who embodies and personifies the idea of resilience, Hussein Al-Baiaty. Hussein, welcome to the show, man.
Wow, man. Thank you. I appreciate that introduction. I will try to live it up as much as I can throughout our conversation.
Well, I've no doubt that you will. So when it became clear that today we were going to talk about resilience, and I was thinking about who's the perfect guest to talk about that theme. It's like it wasn't even like you were one of a group. It was like obviously Hussein, and if Hussein can't do it, then we'll have to figure something out. But it will be Hussein. Yeah. So you are defined by it. You have this book coming out called The Art of Resilience. You have a podcast called The Art of Resilience. So maybe let's start with, in your view, what is the definition of resilience? And maybe that's an opportunity too for you to introduce yourself a little bit and tell our audience about your story.
Yeah, well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. So, just telling from my name, I'm from Iraq, the country in which, cradle of civilization, right? We're talking about from Babylons to Sumerians, which, in my understanding, it connects all of humanity. And so understanding resilience from that perspective just goes to show, like, our people have been continuously resilient through all kinds of times. And, for thousands of years, no matter how far back you go, you find resilient groups of people, you find resilient men and women, you find, and so for me, just going through and researching what it actually means, that's what my book came to be. It was like, how does every individual define that for themselves? And it's powerful, man. It's really powerful. And how I came to understand it was, meeting myself in the book while I was writing it. So.
Yeah, and your story, your journey certainly is a definition of that. I mean, maybe you could talk a little bit about the refugee experience, because that's a hardship that I think those who are not refugees can only conceptualize, and those who are listening who are refugees or come from refugee families certainly can empathize and sympathize with. So maybe you could just walk us through your journey from where you grew up to now. You are a successful entrepreneur and author and artist in the United States.
I appreciate that. So when I was about 5 years old, this is when my memory really started kicking in. It was my mom, dad, my siblings, were all huddled in their master bedroom, in this, in our home in Iraq. And we were in the south of Iraq where things were really churning up at the 1990 Gulf War. And we were huddled, like my dad was doing prayers, basically, like, this could be any moment, could be our last moment, because it was literally raining bombs, and we didn't know if it was Saddam or American troops or Kuwait or what it was. And I was so young, all I remember was the trembling of the house, the stuff coming off the walls, the shaking, and the crying and the hardship. And so my father, I just distinctly remember my father just praying, like, we have this called the opener in the Quran, where it's just like what you say after, someone passes or someone is about to pass. And, that was probably my deepest memory. But somehow, I woke up the next day. So we survived that night, and we ended up being, basically we ended up getting on this truck, this gravel truck that goes around like for building roads and stuff like that. And I remember going out into the middle of the desert to a salt mine, huge salt mine on the border of Saudi Arabia and Iraq, where we inevitably turned into refugees. So we had to flee our country, flee our home with pretty much the clothes on our back and what we could take with us. And again, I was very young, so I had siblings that were a little bit older, and they're in their teenage years. One of them was about to go to college for acting school, the other medical school in Baghdad. And, my father had worked really hard to, just like many fathers here, work really hard to help raise their kids to be, good men, good women, and be of value to society. And so here we are, stuck in this refugee camp, what we thought would be like 3 weeks, until, they took out Saddam. We ended up living there for about four years in the middle of a desert. And
Wow.
And I'm not talking like, Arizona desert or California. Like, this is like barren desert where I didn't see plants, like things don't grow, and so it was harsh, man. It was a really harsh environment. And but there's so many stories that unfolded within that. And so that's where I found that this is where I met my younger self, and really had to get to know what that younger self was doing to live, to survive, to play, to educate, and what my surroundings were like in my environment. And so I started understanding that resilience had a lot to do with supportive structures. So I write about that. Supportive structures meaning like, we had a tent and piece of cloth, and some wooden posts that were given to us by the United Nations, which we turned into a home. But really, my home was my mom, dad, my brothers, my sisters, and that was really like my supportive structures. Those are the things that held up my identity and my culture and heritage, because without them, I'd have easily been erased. So.
Yeah, and you talk about how here you are in this, barren desert, nothing growing around you, certainly like a desolate existence, forced there because of the terrors of war. You're a child, and yet here's your dad, literally using these canvases from other tents, like discarded canvases, and turning them into artwork. I mean, that's the definition of resilience too, right? You're in this
100%.
hard place and you create beauty out of it. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, man. So my father, just to give some context, like my father was an artist. He was a poet. He established one of the first like theaters in Samawa, Iraq. He put women in theater long before that was acceptable. Like, he was a very sort of progressive thinking man. And, I was extremely fortunate to have had that as an example growing up. And lucky for me, he survived the war. And so when we were in this refugee camp, his itch to paint, honestly, one of the only things he brought with him was some clothes and like a bag full of brushes and oil, like oil paint. And my mom was like so angry, like, why would you just bring this? And for him, it was just like, this is my pen and paper. This is how I'm going to document what's about to happen, no matter how it happens. And so we ended up walking around this refugee camp, man. He would like get scraps of tents, like you said, and bring them back, clean them up, and he would paint. Sometimes it'd be abstract, sometimes it would be like painting a picture, and sometimes it was painting components of my heritage, like painting people in certain environments, and teaching me about, like, here's the first man that like tried to fly, and here's this scientist that did this from Baghdad. Like, he was literally educating me through art, which I, again, at the time had no idea. But then he would get like colored pencils or like crayons or whatever from somebody, and he would give me one color at a time to be like, you're just using this for a week, maybe two. So like, use it wisely. And through that, I started learning like color theory. I started learning again, about just the environment in which I was in. One day he painted a whole bouquet of flowers. And I honestly, at that point, because I was so young, I had never really seen a bouquet of flowers, right? And so through painting, I started seeing the world. And that was extremely powerful to me, man. And at the time, I was so young, I didn't think about how much it's going to change my life later on. But at the time, it was, him really trying to embed resilience and hope, right? Like he's like, one day we're coming out of here. Like we're going to get out of here. There's no question. And through that, he started meeting these soldiers that came into our tents who would try to like search for weaponry or whatever, and met my father. And he was extremely social. Met my father, he started selling them paintings, and then they inevitably started bringing him canvases and oil, like legit stuff to work with. And with that, he leveraged that into like, hey, bring that water tanker closer to our community. We need this or we need that for our communities, right? Because there's pockets of communities, especially with families and men and stuff. So, he leveraged his good work and social action to provide something for the community, right? Like they would bring, the United Nations would park, the Saudi soldiers would make them park like 2-3 miles away from families. And he's like, man, we have to walk there, carry this stuff and walk it back. Like you need to create ways where they do pit stops and drop it along the camp. And so like he was using his friendship, if you will, or social status to, bring help for the community and himself. And then he inevitably met the guy who ran the refugee camp, who he had so heard about my father and his work. And he hired him to do like a huge painting of him and his entire family. And, the rest is history after that, man. My father was like, I'll do it. I'll be your slave. I'll sit here and I'll paint forever. Just like get my family out of here. And once my dad met him, became pretty close friends with him. I think within like 6 months we were on a plane, man. And that plane felt like a spaceship, coming to take you out of the madness we were in.
So as you have spent time thinking about your own life story, and you've been, obviously living in that, reflecting on it and converting it into words on paper to now share with the world, what would you say are the principles that define resilience? You already talked about one of them, which is this idea of these sort of social structures, but are there others that you've come to identify on the process of writing this book?
Yeah, definitely, man. I mean, so again, like my father being my mom and dad definitely had a very unique way of viewing the world. They were very faithful, in Islamic rites and in the idea that God has a reason for everything to happen. And though we didn't understand it, of course, there was a lot of optimism in my father's like way of viewing the world. And there was a lot of discipline. Tons and tons of discipline. And so when we say these words on their own, we think that they are mountains sort of by themselves. So like optimism, discipline, patience. I write about 8 of them specifically. But they're really a part of one big mountain, which is the idea of resilience, like one utilizing the other. They're very connected or interconnected. That when you practice patience, you have to have discipline. And when you practice being optimistic, it's embedded in hope. And hope is like the biggest basis of resilience, right? It's the thing that you bounce back into when you are not met with that thing you want to get to doing, like you're always going to fall on your ass at some point in life. So what do you rely on? Well, if you get pushed all the way back to hope, that's the first layer. Then it's supportive structures. And that's exactly how I talk about it in the books. Like these are layers of resilience that when you add them all up, they essentially create this rubber band that is around you. And so no matter what happens, you're able to kind of bounce right back up. So.
Oh, I love it. That's powerful stuff. I can't wait to get my hands on the book when it comes out later this June.
Yeah.
So as we think about people who are in technology and security, and maybe they come from refugee families or close to them, and maybe they don't, it sounds like the things that I'm hearing you say are so directly applicable to the challenges in security, right? Just how we think about persevering and how do we go through hardships, whether it's a company that's been breached or not breached, but headcount gets reduced or key people leave, things like that. And all those principles seem applicable. Would you think that is true? I mean, I know you don't know security and tech the same way that, we might, but I guess the question I'm asking is, are the principles you've described universal or are they unique to your experience?
Yeah, I definitely think they're universal, man. I mean, I think it's embedded in all mammals, all humans, all plants. I mean, you think about plants that stop growing for a while, right? And they go dormant for a while, and then you bring them back up through nourishment, right? Through water, through the right environment, right? Like I always felt like I was planted in the desert and I couldn't necessarily grow, but my dad still nourished me. So it's like bamboo, right? You still feed it the water. And then when I came here, it was like the Northwest where I could just thrive and like grow exponentially. And so with technology, I mean, that's the most exponential thing we can grow, right? And even if we have a moment of stagnation or like a year of stagnation in technology, for example, there's always things we can revamp, improve. And there's always layers to that, and being consistent, being persistent, being patient. I think that's embedded in technology for sure, because how many tries did it take to get the iPod, to get the Zoom stuff going, to, all these things that we don't necessarily think about how long it takes, but for that person to persevere, to really get through it. That is the identity of resilience, and we all embody that in some way. And so what gives you that resilience is tech. For me, it's wrapped in who you are and how you were brought up and what your mission is. And then, I think for me, the guiding compass, your internal guiding compass, is intertwined with your purpose. And so your purpose is internal, not necessarily external. And so when we talk about technology and all these things, it's like, what is the purpose of this technology? How can it serve me, improve my daily life? Or, how can I, be aware of it so that I can protect myself from it, right? And that's where this whole security comes from. And so, for me, it's embedded in everything, and how we see it on both ends is what creates that tension of resilience, right? You're like I said, you're evolving into this giant sort of rubber ball, and no matter how much tension happens around you, you can always flex back into who you really are.
I love it, man. Hussein, you inspire me as always. I'm so lucky to have you as my friend and to be in your orbit. Thank you so much for sharing all this wisdom here today. And can't wait to catch up with you again, man.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me on the show. I hope this is of use to many, and I'm grateful to also know you, my brother. And I appreciate your time, energy, and resources that you put into the world, man. It's very valuable. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Hussein, and thank everybody for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Devo unlocks the full value of machine data for the world's most instrumented enterprises. The Devo Data Analytics Platform addresses the explosion in volume of machine data and the crushing demands of algorithms and automation. Learn more at devo.com.
Blue Lava is the first business platform for CISOs to manage their security program. Blue Lava guides security leaders to effectively measure, optimize, and communicate their security program with confidence and ease in one platform. Learn more at bluelava.net.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Tech Done Different podcast with Ted Harrington. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.